Graham from Oz Development. We are going to go ahead and get started. Today we're going to talk about how to manage ASNs with NetSuite. And we've got a quick agenda we'll look at. We're going to look at a couple of different ways that you may be managing ASNs, as well as maybe being asked to manage them from some of your trading partners. So we're going to talk just quickly about kind of what is an ASN, why are people using it, and then really dive into what are the options? What are your choices if you're managing inbound inventory and you're receiving ASNs from your trading partners? We're going to talk about a couple of different ways to approach that within NetSuite. We're going to talk about a case study of a particular customer that had this problem. Then we're going to talk also about outbound ASNs. If you may be a supplier and one of your customers is asking you for an ASN, what are some of the options you have to help generate that ASN? And really, what are some pros and cons of a couple of those different options that are available to you? Again, we'll talk about a case study, a customer that was faced with that challenge, what they did, how they did it. And then we're also going to show a quick demonstration today just to give people a quick flavor for what it can look like to manage an ASN. And our example today will be a specific inbound ASN process. And then we're going to wrap up with some questions from everybody that's on the webinar today. I do want to point out that everybody is on mute through the webinar. So if you have questions, there's a chat feature in the GoToWebinar, so you can use that to ask questions. We'll do our best to keep an eye on those and answer them sort of as we're going through the material today. But if we don't get to your question, we'll certainly make sure that we catch it at the end of the session. So with me is John Than from Appficiency. In just 1 second, we'll have John introduce himself to everybody. My real quick background. I've been here at Oz Development for about 10 years now. I've been working in the NetSuite space for since 2006, the beginning of 2006. So quite a bit of NetSuite experience in helping NetSuite customers get the most out of their NetSuite accounts. Specifically, our area of focus is logistics and some of the things we'll talk about today. So with that said, John, maybe you could introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Thanks, Troy. My name is John Than. I'm one of the principals and the founder of Appficiency. I was previously with NetSuite for over 6 years in solution consulting, managing distribution and manufacturing verticals for NetSuite. As an Appficiency company, we've worked with dozens of customers, and we have the privilege of working long-term with customers to provide expertise where they may not have the technical bench or depth to manage it themselves. And so we get to have a team-based approach against customers' individual needs, and whether those needs include logistics and warehouse management, financials that get impacted because of the operations that go on in the warehouse. We're there to provide that type of advice and guidance, as well as direct configuration and customization of the system to support the best design.
And just to add to John's introduction, you know, I've worked with John the whole time. I think that he's there at NetSuite, and the thing that I really like, or one of the things I really like about working with John, is he's got so much experience in so many different types of businesses that are using NetSuite. I can come to John with a question about, here's a problem, and he's always got a real practical, real-world example of, here's some ways to solve it. And one of the things that I think is always nice is John is always looking at, here's the pros and cons of everything that we do from a configuration standpoint. And I think that makes him unique in addition to his experience. So we're really happy to have you here, John, and thanks again for doing this.
No problem. My pleasure, Troy. Thank you. So, guys, some of the questions that we're going to answer today include, what is an ASN? I think it's important to level set that. A lot of people look at ASN only from one side of the equation, whether it's an inbound or an outbound. Or some people just assume that it's an EDI-only thing. And so I think it's important to understand what is an ASN. Once we understand what an ASN actually is, then, what's the value and why is the use of ASNs growing? It's important to understand that your trading partners and companies that you work with that are your end customers or your end vendors are going to need or want to use ASN for a variety of reasons. And we're going to go into that. The benefits and what are the options for managing inbound and outbound, so we'll look at both sides of it. And of course, I think for a lot of people that are on this kind of webinar, you know, they want to know, why doesn't NetSuite have a native ASN? And because it doesn't, how do I make it work the right way? And of course, unfortunately, in all things in life, there are trade-offs to make. So we're going to try to help give you some guidance around that today. Next slide, please, Troy. So what is an ASN? You know, essentially an ASN is, you know, well, first of all, the very simple definition is an advanced ship notice. So you're telling somebody that you are going to ship something. And a lot of companies will use that to capture that information and reconcile afterwards, as well as anticipate the necessary operation, staffing, and even systems details to accept that more quickly once it actually gets to your warehouse. It was developed essentially back in the day because goods would just show up at the warehouse stock, and that would cause all kinds of problems. You wouldn't know what you're, you know, any given day, it's a potluck of what you might be doing that day. So ASNs help streamline that process. You can see this process here. The vendor, as an example, on the inbound side, the vendor gets one or more purchase orders from you, and then you know, typically this will be net to them in some fashion or form: email, transmission, EDI. All of these are normal methods to transmit. Once they make a shipment, they send you an ASN. That ASN needs that ASN should technically be a precursor to your purchase order receipt, to the real receipt of it hitting your warehouse. And so you receive the ASN in some fashion or form, and now when it's at the warehouse, you can go through and use a barcoding solution. You can use other kinds of warehouse or enterprise solutions to accept the actual receipt of the goods. If you have something for the receipt of the ASN, then you can receive it prior with as an ASN, not as an actual PO receipt. On the outbound, you're preparing your goods or a product for shipment out, and so you want to let your vendors know. This is a pretty typical requirement for larger retail chains, you know, Target, the Walmart of the world, that kind of thing. They will expect an ASN from you because they need to plan their distribution center appropriately. And so you need to let them know that you're ready to ship something, or that you just shipped something, depending on how long your shipping lead times are. So you know, sometimes you need ASN prior to shipment, prior to the NetSuite technical fulfillment, versus at the time of the NetSuite fulfillment itself. So there's a lot of requirements for ASN throughout, and that's really what an ASN is. It's telling somebody that you're going to send them something, or it's someone telling you that they're going to send you something. Next slide, please. So the ASN has material value. If you actually look at, there's a variety of good sources around the internet. This is Oz Development has done their own studies before, but you can see here in this particular quote from CPF co-chair, for every 5% improvement in on-time delivery and fill rates, warehouse operations can reduce operating inventories level by over 2%, and it's measured using EDI ASNs and physical carton audits. So this is real numbers that you can, you know, you may have completely different results, but you can count on ASNs being impactful to your business. So, you know, yeah. So why ASNs relevant? I think Troy, I'm going to ask about you. I think it's going to be important for you to speak to why a lot of customers have come to you for ASN type requirements.
Yeah, you know, a lot of what we're seeing is that retailers are looking to drive down their costs, and as a result, they're pushing that they're pushing requirements down to you as a supplier, for example. So as John mentioned earlier, you might have a relationship with a Target or a Dick's Sporting Goods or Nordstrom or somebody like that, and they're trying to reduce inventory costs, and therefore they're asking you more and more for ASNs. And as a result, we're finding many companies that hadn't traditionally been requiring an ASN from their supplier are starting to ask that. So in many cases, what ends up happening is I've got a relationship with a large retailer, which is a nice piece of business, but my cost of fulfillment is actually going up because I've got a manual process that I need to work around. And that's really what we're here today to talk about. Is what are some of those options to avoid lots of manual duplicate data entry? And for the retailers, people ask us always, why do they need this ASN? Do they really leverage it? How do they use it? And the answer is very simple. I want to take and reduce receiving your goods to a single barcode scan if I can, as opposed to somebody going through, opening up each box, validating each of those items. They're going to rely on spot checks or audits, as John mentioned earlier, but they're going to use that single scan of a barcode to receive your products and move them throughout their logistics network and get those products out to their customers. So we're seeing a huge increase in small shipments requiring advance ship notice, and our goal is to try to help you as a supplier or you with your suppliers be able to take advantage of an ASN and reduce costs, and as John said, bring down potential inventory levels quite significantly.
So the main three reasons that NetSuite, the main three gaps that NetSuite has to actually being able to effectively interface with normal EDI ASN 856 type documents is really because the ASN receipt does not exist in NetSuite. There's no actual native ASN record, and what we need is a precursor to a PO. We need a PO that's before a PO that behaves like a PO on the inbound. On the shipment side, we need a pick or a pack or potentially fulfillment that behaves like a pick or a pack before that actually occurs sometimes, or that has an audit capability to it. So because there's no native record additionally, other than the actual real transaction in NetSuite, that's one of the major gaps that you have to solve when you're thinking about ASNs with NetSuite. The other major thing is that an ASN can be quite different from either the purchase order or the shipment. It can be a one-to-many relationship. It can fill up a box, a container, so on and so forth. And because of that, it may or may not relate specifically to one transaction in NetSuite. And so because of that, you need a functionality to transform between the two things. And then finally, a lot of companies work off of an allocation rule or commitment type rule where they need to either prepare their inventory for and prioritize who gets shipped what, or vice versa. They need to be able to promise that inventory before they actually have it. It provide that great visibility, but you can't allocate against something that's not a native transaction. So for these major three gaps, you need a custom solution of some kind. And those solutions are, next slide please, Troy, are really going to be a fully custom model, a minimal model, which means that you do a lot more stuff offline, but you just try to track the fact that an ASN is coming in and track the dates of it. Or model 3, which is to use the location. So in each model here, you'll see the first model is really, it's a fully custom concept where you are trying to create a custom record or records, usually it's several records actually, because you have a header and a detail of the ASN. You might have you might have container type details, and you might have line level details. You might have details by pre-pack level or by inner and outer pack, that kind of thing. So because of that, fully custom model is the most robust model, but certainly you can receive it against potentially an EDI solution as well in the more advanced versions of it. The model number 2 is minimal. You just want to track the fact that a date is coming and that you know something is coming to you or that you're going to ship something out. And so you can manually create ASN transactions in the vendor's portal or in some kind of EDI portal. Or if you don't have EDI support, then you do it manually and send it off as some other type of document, Word, Excel, whatever, or flat file, whatever your customer will accept. And then the third model is using locations where you take a normal purchase order, you receive it in an ASN location, and then you use transfer orders to do the final true receipt of it in your warehouse. So you break apart your locations to mimic the fact that an ASN occurred. Of course, that has some financial drawbacks because you are technically taking on inventory before it arrives or before you ship, it's gone. So those are things to think about with each of the models. Now, in the in the trade-offs slide, you'll see that there's a sort of a functional trade-off, there's a customization trade-off, and then there's a process and training trade-off too. So it's important to think of all three things when you're looking at an ASN solution. It's not just about whether or not you can functionally do what you need to do. Unfortunately for that simple, it'd be much easier to design some of these things. So allowing a robust, the fully custom model allows a robust methodology and process for a specific scenario though. So if it's not your scenario, you're typically going to need to tailor it to your scenario. And of course, it's a heavy customization. It doesn't necessarily get NetSuite support for future functionality. And that's, of course, where you want to think about a partner, something like Oz Development, which has a robust enterprise solution, which will continue to scale and support with you. But it still requires significant training and staff expertise to use, whereas Model 2, much more minimal, but of course you get a lot less out of it. It allows deep visibility, and it's easily updated, but it doesn't actually have any interface with your vendors or your customers. And that's typically the #1 driving force of an ASN, which is why this model is actually probably not used as much as either 1 or 3. Model number 3 was actually only even possible via NetSuite's distribution resource planning a couple releases ago. So, this is the other important piece to all of these trade-offs. There's an expertise level to consider, but then there's an ongoing expertise decision to be made too, because as software changes, whether that's Oz Development software improves or whether NetSuite software improves, your decisions might change entirely on those as well. So those are some of the trade-offs that you need to make as you go through it and think about who's touching these things and do they have the expertise to keep up with it, or do you want to kind of freeze in time and then reevaluate, pick a time 5 years later, 7 years later, whatever that time horizon is for you. So I think that gives you some good idea of what steps are and sort of functional breakdowns of these things. I think it's time to talk about less, and Troy's got a great example to do that with.
We were contacted a couple of years ago from a company called Teak and Mahogany, and they sell essentially outdoor furniture, patio furniture, table, chairs, that sort of thing. They happen to be located in Singapore. And the way that their warehouse facility is, it's a shared warehouse space. I think about it like a self-storage facility that we oftentimes see here in the United States, where I can go rent a small self-storage space that's 4 feet wide, or I can go rent something that's 15 feet wide and 20 feet deep and 10 feet high. I have these small containers of storage space. And that's essentially how Teak and Mahogany's warehouse is. It's a shared space, and they rent these small containers within this larger facility. So they had 2 challenges. The first challenge that really got them started looking for a solution was they only were allotted so much time on their receiving dock before they would actually have to pay more for spending time on the receiving dock. So when a truck would arrive for them, they had, I believe it was 60 minutes, 45 minutes to unload that truck and get all of the material out of that receiving area so somebody else in the shared space could use it. Well, if you think about receiving furniture like this, and a lot of these are things that you put together, it's a lot of square rectangular boxes, but they're fairly large. So the challenge for Teak and Mahogany was they didn't want to put all these items away into different storage areas without having a very clear view of what did they actually receive. And when they would order things from their suppliers, they would place many, many POs that would be contained within a particular container that was inbound to them. So not only did they have to verify all the right products, they then were manually sorting these to line them up against the different purchase orders that they had opened with their vendors. So ultimately, what happened was they were receiving an ASN from their supplier, and through sort of that Model 1 that John mentioned a few minutes ago, they have a custom record inside their NetSuite account that tracks all of that ASN data. So what happens now is when that container unloads, they have a mobile scanner device, and they can scan there's a label associated with an ASN. It's typically referred to as an SSCC label. It's basically a serial number for each carton that you receive, and that serial number tells me what's in the box. So now they'll scan that one single barcode, and that could be a barcode with 12 lamps in it. It could be 2 tables in it. It could be a set of chairs that are in that container. Whatever that carton contains can be received in inventory in a single barcode scan. The other thing that can happen with that carton is there's reference to the PO. So I may have a carton that has 10 different items in it, and that could span 5 or 6 different purchase orders. So again, I don't have to go through, pull all those products out of the box, line them up to a PO, write it all down on a sheet of paper, and then have somebody go back and manually enter this information into their NetSuite account. So in Teak and Mahogany's case, it gave them a much faster receiving process because they could get those goods off the receiving dock so they weren't paying more, so they were lowering their cost of goods. It also gave them a much more accurate process because they didn't have manual mistakes from people writing things down on sheets of paper and rekeying that data into their NetSuite account. And thirdly, it made inventory available for sale more quickly. As soon as somebody scanned that barcode, that ASN-related SSCC label, well, then I can receive that inventory into NetSuite, and I can make it available for planning, for sale to my customers. So it was a scenario where there were physical constraints that really drove them to that, but the end result was increased accuracy, increased speed, and this was a process for them that really didn't require a lot of training. Scan the barcode and then scan the next box. It was a very, very simple process in deployment.
On the outbound side, making it work is really one of 2 options, following the similar underlying structure we talked about earlier, but your options have to do with whether or not you have a pre-pack concept or not. That really kind of drives the choices that you have and trade-offs that you need to make. So the fully custom model still applies. The custom record mimics a precursor to an item fulfillment, so it allows you to have a pack accuracy checkpoint. It allows you to have a split or some kind of virtual containerization of product that may belong on multiple lines from multiple transactions, and it gives you a single barcode that that your end customer can receive against and accept all goods into inventory or a cross-dock scenario. When you have the pre-pack side, then you do have to use, you need rules that line up with the pre-pack quantity or rhythm, as it's sometimes known, so that particular either assortment or spread of goods across a style or a color stream or some other dimension of your product base is needed so that the correct pre-pack can be created and delivered to the customer's stores as needed as well. And so you need a special batch label just to be able to do that and track the fact that you have this correct rhythm of goods within your pre-pack. From a trade-offs perspective, if you look at the trade-offs, then you see that each extra pack step, it requires more overhead, but gives you better accuracy. So that's a big, that's very important, especially in some scenarios on the outbound side of the shipper. You might have penalties with your customers when this kind of thing comes on, and you'll see that you'll see some of these trade-offs that were taken in Troy's next example. And it's complex. It's complex to make this type of customization in NetSuite, especially one-off. And it's, I almost pretty much never recommend it. It makes more sense to use an enterprise solution like Oz Development in that type of scenario. There are too many things to think about. You might be able to paint the right functional picture. You might be able to get the process right, and then you'll realize that you don't have the reporting level details that you want. So these types of things only experience can teach you, or real good guidance can help you with, and that's where it's important to make the trade-off between getting some off-the-shelf solution that has a lifespan, that has a the wisdom of many behind it versus trying to go off on your own, we hardly recommend it. And then finally, on the process and training side, you know, it's almost always the type of environment that this happens in is a choice between manual and trusting someone who's been doing this a long time versus an automated solution. And that trusting that one individual seems like it's an easy and low impact solution for change management until something goes wrong. And so that's where it's important to have a dedicated process where new pre-packs, maintenance, new trading partners that come on board, all these things have a process to go through, and you have a set system that will guide you through that. So I think that gives them some idea of the outbound, and you know, Troy, I think a customer example on this front will make a lot more help for people here.
Great. So we've got another example here, and the reason I like this example is there's actually two brands. So there's a brand, Big Agnes, which is basically camping equipment, high-end sleeping bags, tents, that type of product. And then there's a portion of the business called Honey Stinger, which makes you know, energy foods, gels, chews, that sort of thing. So they're related products, but they're a bit different. And one of the reasons that they're different is something that John mentioned a minute ago, is that pre-pack concept. So take, for example, the Honey Stinger energy gels. When I go in, one of their big customers was Sports Authority that they were bringing on board. And Sports Authority had requirements for what those packages needed to look like. So they would have, you know, there might be 2 different sizes and 6 different flavors, and each store needed to have certain quantities of certain things. And some of their products were sold in a pack that was sort of an individual unit. Some things were sold in a case of 12. But for them, it was very important that each store had a certain sort of predefined shipment. So for Honey Stinger, this was a lot of manual labor just to get the packaging and everything done physically the appropriate way, but then to be able to go back to a web form and type all this data in of what's in each carton was very, very time consuming. And as John had mentioned earlier, whenever they would make a mistake, they would not only get a chargeback from Sports Authority or Dick's Sporting Goods or whomever the trading partner was, but there's also a scorecard that goes along with that. And a lot of times, if I'm a new supplier to, you know, Dick's Sporting Goods, let's say, and, you know, my first shipment shows up and there's errors with the ASN, and then my second shipment shows up and there's errors with my ASN, and my third shipment, I quickly have a very negative scorecard, and the buying organization starts to look at that and say, you know, maybe we should look for an alternative supplier. The other thing that came into play for Honey Stinger was some of their products, I think particularly on the Big Agnes side, go through a cross-docking process. So one of their customers, had said to them that we're going to order, you know, 75 of these sleeping bags, and you're going to ship them to our distribution center, but we want them pre-packaged so that we get each of these 3 varieties to each retail store. So I'm shipping 100 sleeping bags to one distribution center, but they actually have to be broken up into these groups of 4 or 6 or something for each retail store. So not only did they need to cartonize the products properly, but they had to label the box to say, this box is going to distribution center A, but the end retail store this box is destined for, that address also had to be captured as part of that ASN. So they had a lot of requirements. And as John said earlier, you know, if you could take one person and teach them all of those requirements, it's very cost effective to do that. But as soon as that business starts to grow, that person goes on vacation, now we've got an awful lot of industry knowledge that needs to be trained, cross-trained, and hopefully done correctly over time. The end result in this case was we wanted to leverage some packing validation to track what goes into each carton, generate those ASN labels, and in this case, working in conjunction with their EDI provider, who's SPS Commerce, be able to send those ASNs automatically directly out of their NetSuite account. The other thing that I think is kind of a neat benefit that we haven't really talked about just yet is when I send those products off to my trading partner, that trading partner may come back to me and say, Troy, you made a mistake. You didn't send us all the products that we ordered. I'm going to issue a chargeback to you. Historically, as a supplier, I've got to go, look in a filing cabinet, look in an Excel spreadsheet. I've got to go ask somebody. It's a very labor-intensive process for me to go back and actually try to defend against the chargeback because I don't have good visibility to what was actually packed in each box. Well, as we use an automated system to do that, now I have carton-level detail in NetSuite. So when that customer calls me and says, hey, Troy, you missed something, I can say to them, oh, there's 4 of them in this carton, 6 of them in this carton, and 3 of them in this other carton. So I can tell them exactly what box those products were in. I can tell them what that box weighed. I can tell them the tracking number. So I've got a lot of visibility to defend against a chargeback quickly. And what ends up happening is over time, suppliers realize these guys have themselves organized. They have visibility to this data. And unless we're really sure there's a problem, then we're not going to issue these chargebacks, which is something that is more likely to happen with somebody who is less in an automated type environment. So the other thing that we wanted to do today was just to give folks an example of what does this possibly look like from a NetSuite account perspective. So we'll switch out of the PowerPoint for a minute, and John and I will talk through this and show one example of how I might work with an advanced ship notice. So in this particular case, I'm going to use a receiving ASN. So in NetSuite, the first thing that I'm going to look at is I've got a purchase order. It's a regular old purchase order. It's a handful of items on it. But I also have an ASN record. And this is that Model 1 that John mentioned earlier. I've got a series of custom records that are populated with data that are related to an advanced ship notice. So what I'm gonna show you here is this ASN number. So what this is telling me is on the outside of that carton, there's a barcode, that SSCC barcode that I mentioned earlier. And based on scanning that barcode, I can understand what purchase order is contained in that item, in that carton, what item is contained within that carton, and what quantity. So I now have a mechanism in NetSuite to say this could be, 2 items in a box. It could be 100 items in a box. It could be 1 purchase order in a box. It could be 10 purchase orders in a box. I now have a holding mechanism for this ASN data. And as a result, as we'll see in a minute, I can now, if I want to, do an automated receiving process against that ASN record. Before I do that, I just want to pause and John, ask you if there's anything you wanted to mention in regard to this sort of custom record, how this gets populated, how it gets created, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Troy. A couple of things I want to add here is when folks are looking at the records here in this view, they remember that creating the record and having it integrated and populated with EDI provides a lot of additional downstream benefits. One of our customers would resolve their ASN issues by going to the item record in NetSuite and seeing the list of all the ASNs that it had been on. So the information here is not static. It's going to proliferate in the rest of your accounts. You'll be able to see it. A shipper could potentially know that that the ASN is coming in late, and that their shipment that they're planning is going to be late. So there's a full unified impact that a single record like this can have. On top of that, Troy mentioned the ability to barcode scan that ASN number. Well, it's not just that number that you can barcode scan. You can barcode scan many of the other numbers too. So there's a whole internal process that can be optimized because you have multiple points where now you have an open face record in NetSuite that can really be used for many different steps and of course reporting, and you can apply all the NetSuite normal security procedures to it. But the key thing is that you'll find that your staff find ways to use it in different views, and just having this central record as the ASN keeps your financials clean. It keeps the real transactions, as they call them, clean, but it gives you all the process and operations controls you want.
And John, you had talked about visibility, but a question had come in regard to specifically visibility in a portlet. And I'm going to sort of summarize that question, but you can add to this. But essentially, could I create a portlet that leverages this data from a custom record like this ASN record here?
Yeah, absolutely. No reason at all not to. Portlets, suitelets are two important options that you have to do this kind of thing. So yeah, portlets are quite common. Whether it's a standard search portlet or whether it's a custom scripted portlet, both can be leveraged in this case, and all information from both the ASN as well as all the child purchase orders or child sales orders that it impacts can be brought to bear in a single unified view.
Perfect. So, one example of that could be, I'm a warehouse manager and I need to plan staff. I know I've got an inbound ASN and it's a container with thousands of items in it versus a small package shipment of 4 boxes with 20 different items in it. I could use this information to have a portlet to let me know I need to transition staff appropriately to be able to handle this inbound shipment based on its size. So let's take a look at the example. So typically when we think about receiving, we think about our purchase order. And here, we see our normal view of these items that we have not yet received. What I can do is if I move over to this mobile device, this is a pretty common industry standard Motorola scanner device. On this, I have our OzLink mobile enterprise solution. And one of my options within my receiving modules, I can receive a purchase order, transfer order, I can receive a return, but I have this receive ASN. And if I click that button, all I'm going to do is I'm going to simply scan the ASN or SSCC number from my carton. So as a user in the warehouse, if I'm a temporary employee or a seasoned employee, all I need to do is scan that barcode, and OzLink will go ahead. It will look at that custom record, and it will update the custom record for me, and it will also update my purchase order. So in this case, I scanned 1 box. We go ahead. Let's say we scan our next box, and then OzLink, again, automatically receives all of the cartons, or all of the contents, the items associated with that scan. So now, if I go back to my purchase order, and before I refresh this page, I want to show you the ASN record as well, because you'll notice we had 3 different cartons, 3 different SSCC numbers here. So when I refresh the page on the purchase order, what we should see is that this purchase order has now been partially received because we didn't scan that 3rd carton. So here we can see that I received 5 of this first item, 10 of this second item, and the single quantity of this 3rd item. But I can also look at those custom records. And again, if I refresh my NetSuite page, I can see the result of what's happened so far on my custom records if I want to. So I'll see that this last item, this carton 13, we haven't yet received that yet. So I've got real granular visibility into what's actually happened in my warehouse, and I've got that visibility in a very real-time nature.
Troy, if I could just add, this is where you will now have the record you need to do the reconciliation as well. So if you, depending on businesses, so we've seen some that reconcile based upon units, units received overall. Others reconcile line by line on the transaction. This ASN record allows you to store what was supposed to be on the ASN. And if you pick it up directly via an EDI type connection, then you have control over your vendor's supplier performance, essentially vendor performance, and vice versa. On the way out, you have that additional check, like Troy mentioned earlier, that allows you to stand ground when the retailer's distribution warehouse makes an error, and doesn't give you full credit for what you've shipped.
Absolutely. Another question had come in regard to these items. In the scenario where we're receiving a box like this that contains multiple products, what are some options around printing barcoded labels? So maybe those items come in with a UPC code on them. I want to print my label, my own barcoded item number on it. I know from an OzLink standpoint, I can print a label when I do that receiving process for those items, but maybe you could just talk for a minute. I know there's lots of questions we get around what are my options for printing labels for those items?
Yeah, great question, Troy, and from the audience. You can print essentially all the barcode labels you want directly from the ASN record itself, actually, if you wanted to. You know, the way Oz Development does it, it gives you kind of, I always go back to old terminology, which is license plated barcode, the SSC label, as Troy called it, and of course that gives you the visibility underneath everything that you have in there. But the actual item labels, and they can be done on a per count or a per line basis, so that you could have, you know, as many labels print off as you need, depending on whether you accept an entire quantity or whether you accept a partial quantity, but that represents a full line quantity on a transaction. You can print those labels out directly from NetSuite. Now, it's a small customization, and you can do it off of a unique field. But for the most part, something like Oz Development Solution, it's already kind of thought through, and most of the labels you need to print already there. So you can always just follow their process if you don't have one established. If you want to establish your own, or if you have a specific one that you must enforce, it's usually not a big deal to make an additional barcode level printout from either a custom record or from the native.
All right, great. Another question had come in about multiple vendors, and can this approach of using custom records support, you know, different vendors where they've got different packaging quantities, that sort of thing? And you know, certainly from our experience, that's very, very common. The goal of using this level of customization is we want to make sure that it's applicable for all of your vendors. So there's certainly nothing here that would limit you to say, hey, this is only for my big vendors or small vendors. The goal would be to use that ASN record for any of your trading partners that are EDI enabled or capable of providing you an ASN. And I tend to think about it in that EDI standard, but it certainly could be something that comes to you via an FTP or CSV file or something else like that.
Yeah, if I can add one thing to that, Troy. Once some vendors or some scenarios where you do have an issue with vendor compliance, there's nothing preventing you from taking that ASN and turning it into an alert of some kind to let you know that the pre-pack has not been satisfied, whether that's because it's you know, out of rhythm, or whether that's because it's over or under fulfilled. All three of those can be sins in the logistics industry. So you can use that ASN immediately in NetSuite as a real-time alert that this is not, you know, that there's a reconciliation problem before any goods ever get to your door.
Great. You know, another question came in, and it was talking about what are my options for troubleshooting if something goes wrong. And I don't know, John, if you'd feel comfortable maybe talking a little bit about, I know we've talked about a couple of different approaches for dealing with an ASN. In this custom mode that we've talked about, using this custom record, you know, the guns are going to provide us with visibility if there's a mistake, you know, the wrong items, the wrong quantities. If it's an outbound ASN, you know, we can capture the information inside of a NetSuite record. But I don't know, maybe you can talk a little bit about what you've seen and how people maintain and manage if something doesn't go according to plan.
Yeah, sure thing. You know, the best thing I have to say to that is the visibility is there, and what you need to do is processize it, if that's a word. So there's typically a couple key steps you need to do. You'll end up inspecting the ASN record. You might need to check EDI logs if your EDI connection for some reason you believe is faulty and the transmission was off. And then the third thing you'll actually need to check is the receipts. Now, the receipts are typically cleaner if you do barcode. If you're actually enforcing barcode scanning, then typically you won't have to worry about that part too much. So it's going to happen between the ASN creation point and the receipt point. And since the ASN is tied to both, it's a simple matter of two-stage searches that you can create in NetSuite that'll provide you the sort of, hey, check this search, find out your errors. Check this other search. If there's an error on the first search, go deeper with this second search. And then thirdly, you're looking down probably at individual records themselves if you're in a high volume environment where something specific went wrong. I would say that for most of our customers, the key thing has been to see if they can find ways to collectively categorize the errors and then deal with them. So, a custom record in NetSuite is, we speak about it as if it can do so many things, and it can. You can add things like reason codes to it. You can put workflow against it, and you can put workflow against some of the records in NetSuite, the native ones too. But you can do it all at the ASN level. So that's sort of the interesting part is you can let the real transactions, quote unquote, be just your symptoms and fix root causes in a more open, controlled environment like the ASN record, where you can force it to behave a specific way. So that's sort of a general answer to your question, but certainly you can. It's a matter of finding out where your errors lie in the first place. Put a safe search or two together for that. Put it on a dashboard. If it still shows up as a problem, go ahead and apply workflow or suite script to it to enforce it and lock it down.
And John, another question that had come in, it was regard to volume. And to me, I think about volume a little differently from an outbound ASN for an inbound ASN. But the question was really, what sort of order volume do I need to, or what sort of order volume do customers typically have when they start to think about taking on one of these solutions for automating these processes versus manual manual data entry? And I've got some background in that, but if you had some input as well, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I'm going to let you speak. I think you're the more wiser of the two on this, Troy. But our rule of thumb, is if to unwind an error, you had to inspect more than 100 lines in a day, you need a solution. So that's sort of my rule of thumb off the cuff.
Yeah, and I think similarly especially on the inbound side for me, if I've got purchase orders that are coming in and I've got hundreds of items that are coming through, and I'm manually reconciling that. Anytime I see somebody with a packing list and circling numbers, if I have access to an ASN from my supplier, I know we've got an ROI that's very, very fast of automating that process, and I know we're going to make that process more accurate. On the outbound side, I think it's actually a little bit trickier because I'll give you an example. We worked with a company that sells gloves, and for them, they had an opportunity at a large retailer, and their initial input into that retailer was like 3 sales orders. But if those 3 sales orders didn't get done properly, their chance for reorder was going to go down pretty significantly. So for them, they started off with, I think it was over like a month period, 3 large orders, but it warranted the investment in an automation solution because that business could really, really grow. And it did. Over time, that first season went, and it went well, and now the retailer's carrying multiple product lines from this company. So sometimes your relationship, especially if you are the supplier, your relationship with your trading partner may help drive it more so than, oh, if I do 10 outbound orders that require an ASN per day, there may not be such a hard, fast rule there. 2 other quick questions I wanted to answer because a number of people have asked them today. We are recording a webinar today, so we will post that online over the next day or 2, and we'll send everybody a link. We'll also post the slides themselves, so if you want to go back and use those slides as a reference, we'll make sure and provide those as well. With that said, we're kind of getting near the time limit, so John, I want to turn it back over to you. I know we very, very quickly want to just talk a little bit about kind of who we are, and I'm going to let you go first and just talk briefly about kind of your background a little bit more, or kind of what services you guys really offer.
Thanks very much, Troy. I appreciate that. You know, for those on the call and for those who've kind of heard us speak on, share our wisdom on various points of, on various inflection points in your decision-making process, what we try to do is provide an expert solution and an expert administrative service to all our customers all together. We're active NetSuite administrators, we're active NetSuite project consultants, as well as active NetSuite integrators to the NetSuite ecosystem, partner ecosystem, as well as sort of NetSuite to your homegrown proprietary systems. So because of that, we really provide a team approach. We don't think that it's easy for one person to do it all. I know, even with my experience and with all the things I've seen, if I was a man alone at a company, it would be a lot harder to actually solve the problem. It's hard to find the resources. It's hard to get a broader view of what is often a simple question in NetSuite, but it has so many downstream impacts. It's not easy to make that decision. And so we provide that team-based approach. We provide the ability to say, this customer does it that way and that customer does it a different way. And it's each experience different types of trade-offs, and this is what the type of people that have to do that at the company are like as well, because the human factor matters a lot. So because of this, we've set up our model to be a shared model where you can get a piece of efficiency, if you will. You can contract out our services, have us over time get to be an expert in your business, not just in the NetSuite application, and provide end-to-end whatever you need for NetSuite. Let's put it that way. Whether it's a simple report or customization, or whether it's a complex report and it requires a full customization just to support the report. We've definitely seen it all.
Well, and I can't echo that enough. To me, as I mentioned earlier, I can come to John and his team with a problem, and they're gonna have experience that says, here's how somebody else has solved this problem or addressed this problem. And the thing that I like, and one of the reasons I like working with John so much, is I think his philosophy is similar to mine. We may come to John with a problem, and he says, you know what, here's how I would solve it, but we're not the best people to solve it for you. He may direct you to another partner, and we do the same thing. If we're a good fit, we'll let you know that. If we don't think we're a good fit, we'll let you know that as well. And I think it's one of the reasons why we have so much success as individual companies, but when we work together, end results tend to be very, very strong. So thanks again, John, for doing this. I really can't encourage people enough if they're looking for some help, if they've got some questions, something in NetSuite they're struggling with. I challenge them to find somebody that can help them better than you guys can. So thanks for taking the time to do this with us. We really appreciate it. And with that said, we'll close up the webinar. Everybody will see an email from us, like I said, in the next day or so with the link to the recording and the slides. And then if you have questions, certainly reach out to us anytime. Thanks again, John. Thanks, everybody, for joining.
Thank you, everyone.